Hi, it's Darren here from People Purpose Place. I'm super stoked to have the three Amigo back in the same location, virtual location, that is. And I think we've got some really, really good conversation to dive into today. And because we're sort of catching up for the first time again, we had a bit of a today and thought that we might be able to maybe summarize our experiences over the last week and keep them somewhat aligned with what Colby and I conversation was last week, which is what do humans want from their house? We have our check-in question, and on following on with the same lines that we talked about with the idea of this being about humans. Can we name one human experience that you've had this week which has been enlightening or refreshing? Rowan, did you want to go first?
Wow. While I've been working on my tan in Bali, I've had an immeasurable number of refreshing experiences. And I guess fundamentally it comes back to the youth, around me, that there's a younger generation who, as much as I don't get them, and they probably don't get me, but they do some awesome community stuff in their own way. I don't see it or recognize it as that, but they do some very cool, inclusive, it's just ingrained in their nature, which has been really, really heartwarming to see.
I obviously had a great week last week. Got up to catch up with a few of the crew from People Purpose Place, including Christine last week, while Rowan was taking in the sun on the beaches. But on my way home, a schoolmate of mine who, I don't know how this works, but he was actually born on the same day I was, about a year or 2 years older than me. And we went to school together, and we had done some business over the years together. And he had a career at that stage in real estate sales. So he's the enemy. No, he wasn't the enemy. But he was certainly right up there in the capitalist climbing area. And I caught up with him and his wife in Cairns, and we had a really good in-depth conversation about a few things. But the most impressive thing for me is from someone coming from that background. He's thrown in that career. He's always had a passion for martial arts, and he's opened a dojo in Cairns, specifically with the goal of helping children and young people learn a martial art, learn the discipline that goes with that. And he's sort of acknowledging that he's never going to get rich doing that, but it's given him a sense of purpose and fulfillment doing that. So that was something that I thought I didn't know, knowing him in a younger version. I was never quite sure I was ever going to see him in that position, but it was really heartwarming and enlightening to see him and his wife both get to that point. So that was certainly my experience for the week.
But I think that leads into perfectly into what I feel like was my most intense experience of the week, which was our meeting on Thursday, where we had 7 very keen people purpose placers. Everybody who's been involved in this, except Rowan, who was off doing other stuff and having other experiences. And one of the things that I found terribly interesting about that, there were 7 of us, 4 of whom have some sort of chronic, more or less civilizational disease, autoimmunity, myalgic encephalomyelitis, clonus. I mean, all these weird diagnoses, 4 of us, Lyme disease. And there was a certain level, it was a very interesting conversation to me, and I'd love to pick it apart a little further this is my answer to the check-in question, but I'd love to carry on with this conversation if it seems appropriate, because there was a real practical level of, we were getting some work done, we were doing some planning, we were moving People Purpose Place forward, we were moving a particular project forward, we were coming together on everybody knowing where the projects would be located, what the places looked like, who the people might likely be, what the purpose was. But there were layers underneath that, and part of what was so fascinating about that was how really there were 7 of us, some of whom we had not met each other before in person. We'd all met each other online or in some form, but there was an emotional alignment going on, and it was fascinating to me because we were, there was such a preponderance of people who've gone through some really difficult health struggles, one of whom his whole life. Your wife, for example, Darren, only recently, me a little bit longer, and then one of our other very close people purpose place, not-for-profit people, only quite recently has become quite disabled. And the interesting thing that I'd love to pull apart if we can, and Rowan wasn't there, so it's a little unfair, but this feeling of how 7 people were really our real business was emotionally aligning, and how much openness to that there was, and how much empathy and compassion there was from everybody to everybody else.
I wonder whether, and this might be a question back to you, Christine, I wonder whether because we're able to share our human experience in its most painful of human experiences, which is real health issues, whether that was able to give us a level of trust between us that maybe we wouldn't have had if we hadn't have shared those things. And so my point was probably that by sharing our humanness, it gave us an opportunity to find a place that was more combined. So, and as I was sort of saying, even from my own point of view, like yourself and Russell probably have greater synergies having a shared health issue or some shared health repercussions. And myself, as I was mentioning, it's sometimes hard as a husband of someone who has autoimmune to really be able to understand that, because I don't. I'm fit, I'm healthy, and I don't have those issues. So sometimes it's hard to understand that, whereas you all were able to share that because you're in that experience. So my question back to you was bound by our ability to have enough trust to share stuff that we normally wouldn't share with others.
Yes, I think so. And I think that's a really important point. But the other really important point is that there was nobody particularly young in that crowd. I think the youngest person might have been Fiona, but the youngest one that I know the age of was 54, 56 or something. So it's, everybody was over the half century mark. I'm 73, so I'm at the 3/4 century mark. But everybody had, and each one of the people there had really dedicated a great deal of their life to finding their purpose, to becoming purposeful, to finding a place where they felt they could act out their purpose at whatever time of life they were in. And I think that it's that inner work that each one of us had done separately, plus the empathy that we developed, some of us only because we've been ill, the compassion that we developed for ourselves and for each other. And so it seemed to me that there was a magic about that conversation that is exactly the magic, a quiet magic, nothing, no poppers and no bubbles and no sparkles and nothing like that, no fireworks, but just this beautiful, quiet alignment. I think I'd like to connect this to Rowan's experience on Bali, perhaps, because I haven't been to Bali in 35 years.
Yes.
The first time I went there was soon after I came to Australia. So it was like 50 years ago. Bali was a different.
They tell me it's changed.
It was different. Everybody stayed in a loman. There was only a toilet. There was a hole in the floor. Everybody washed with a bucket. There was a big hotel somewhere, but none of us travelers, we were disdained all that kind of thing. And there was that entire Balinese surroundings where you have that same feeling of this whole society had aligned itself. And I'm sure that's changed a bit, but I'll bet there's something left of that group emotional, spiritual alignment of
there's a very strong
alive.
sense of community, very strong sense of community there still. And although it was expressed to me, so I was trying to understand, and a large focus was about relaxing and spending some time with my partner, which was wonderful. But trying to understand the local conditions from a local's perspective was just my interest, you know, what's housing, what's facilities, what's life like. And there are some enormously stark differences. We have a sense of frustration about our glitchy internet. You know, in this modern, advanced nation of Australia, we spent all this money in this damn internet, we still can't get it stable. But Bali, they don't have a fridge in their house.
But still?
Today.
Wow.
4 million residents on the island of Bali, which is the population of Queensland. They don't have trains. They don't have a fridge. So that's, you know, some of the have-nots pretty stark. In the hotel, you still use bottled water.
Yeah.
Because water supply is not sufficiently. Don't drink ice in anything.
No.
So, you know, that's the level of, okay, there's some things they don't have. Then we went and spent some time in the community talking to, we did an e-bike tour, which was, you know, hilarious. Some of us hadn't been on a push bike in 20 plus years. So that was also pretty exciting.
And the traffic's a little different there.
Exactly. And we were saying confidently to ourselves, they're not going to put us on the main road going past out the front of this premises here, because that would be nuts.
But they did.
We strapped our helmets on and went straight out on the main road. And I've got to say that any Australian driver would look at that road and say, it's at best a 2-lane road, at the very best, with no footpaths. You can get 4 vehicles across that, no worries. So, and some of those vehicles are scooters with the whole family. You know, Dad's driving with a durry, Junior's standing on the foot pegs in between his legs. Junior number 2 is behind him on the seat, and Mum's sitting side saddle, texting on the phone. Nobody's wearing a helmet.
Nobody's got a helmet. So they only have flip flops on.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And I'm old and slow and hop straight into that traffic on a push bike, and nobody gave me any aggro. Now, if you take that to Australia, if you hopped into a traffic situation and were unskilled, slow, don't know what you were doing, you would immediately be road raged. It would just be like someone would take my head off in 5 minutes flat.
Yeah.
But the experience was amazing. We had a guide at front and a guide at the back. They said, stay on the left, and the traffic will work its way around you. And it did.
And it did. And it did.
And I still don't know how they missed us.
But what do you put the lack of anxiety to? Is it because there's so other little rules around that they don't feel flustered? Because I'm still intrigued by that, because we would normally find a fair level of anxiety just from pure chaos, which was I was
definitely anxious as a passenger in a car, picked up from the airport in a car. My first look at it was like, oh my God, someone's going to get killed.
But they don't have, actually we have probably just as bad a death rate. I think there are a lot of accidents there, but you know,
they're probably generally slower, and they're generally lighter vehicles. Scooters and such.
All of those experiences that you've had or that I've had in other countries, or that we had on Thursday, Darren and I, with these 5 other people, it was about finding alignment. And this, I believe, is why we find this all very striking. This is why we've come together, is to find alignment and to find other people who want to find some kind of emotional alignment, so we could flow like a river together. And of course, a flowing river hits rocks and it looks pretty crazy for a while. So you can't expect it to be always flowing peacefully, but
No.
they've done things that no Westerner has ever figured out.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
that's very
it's our obligation to sink into that and find alignment.
yeah, 100%.
I do wonder at the same time, I've been reading, which is related, about the automobile rollout post World War II. Now, lots of these, China didn't have that.
No.
Bali hasn't had that. They've got cars now, but still predominantly scooters.
Scooters,
And that has constrained our whole living in a home, getting around paradigm, particularly in Australia. Australia's a particularly bad example of being car-centric.
Mm.
Whereas other, and particularly older European cities and other cultures that haven't been so car-centric, out of necessity, you don't have this metal box of protection around you. You're actually bumping shoulders with someone who's pedaling a bike next to you. So there's a more intimate connection. You know, some of that makes sense just from a personal proximity. But it also changes your background fundamental, that the only way I'm going to get from point A to point B is to get along with the traffic. So I better get in the left-hand side of the river if it's flowing that way, rather than being in a tin box expecting to be safe and I'll just bounce off things till I get there.
But we want to be with
today.
the learning types, and we want to be learning. And I think that's the important thing, is that when you have a moment of alignment, like we had on Thursday, like you were feeling on Bali, like you had with your mate who had come to purpose, like you have, Darren. At those moments, that's where you learn deeply what it means to be more aligned. And if we don't learn that, we're never going to make a success of this people, purpose, place project.
100%. And I also think along that same line, the learning stuff. So I was interested that, also during that conversation, we had people there who probably didn't know much about what we were doing, like ultimately the people, purpose, place stuff. But interestingly enough, I found even, Jane, my wife, who hasn't been engaged in it, was still like, oh, that's really interesting, and was trying to understand the application of some of the things we were talking about. And Russell in particular and we started to have that conversation about saying, the people who we think are best going to suit where we're going to are the people who are moving on from this self-improvement into this self-awareness space. So if you're more self-aware, and we talked about that podcast with Seam, where the bloke was talking about the unfolding rather than this self-improvement thing where you're just trying to get better and better. I need to be better at this.
Whereas I need a new skill.
Correct.
I need a new skill.
Correct. Whereas self-awareness or unfolding might be an acceptance of who we are. And by accepting who we are, we can then fully be ourselves. And that, I think, also then gives us the ability to work better with others if we're fully accepting of our good parts and our bad parts and our triggers and our, prehistory and all that sort of stuff. So I think even that, as you said, the shared learning to get to that same place really also helps you to be on the same page, because we have all these, top level, high level, how are you today? Good, thanks. We don't often get into those in-depth conversations about, who are you as a person and what does that mean to speak to other people?
And who are we right now together?
Yeah.
Because that's the whole Balinese road situation, isn't it? Who are we on this road, all cooperating with each other?
Yep.
Yeah. So, it's inspiring to see. They do we actually got to see their place of, this small community went and saw their place of burial and cremation, and the weekend just gone, they'd had a cremation. So it's a central place, and just describing the process and the respect that, because we're poor, we wait for there's enough people have passed in the village. So typically that's every 4 years, and we dig them all up and we have a group cremation. because so there's this practical saves the dollars, but there's still this very connected, and we're honouring the dead and honouring our community by having following the ritual and the process.
Is that a Hindu process? Is that a
yes.
Hindu?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, it's a Hindu culture, although not particularly. Most people aren't particularly religious, but every community will have temples, and they have a lot of display and ritual, but not necessarily every Saturday morning going to church or every Sunday morning going to church, or not necessarily not eating beef or whatever. Yeah, they're pragmatic about it as well. So yeah, but
so you're saying they would actually, like, if people had passed a couple of years ago, if they didn't have the resources to have a cremation, they would just bury them and then dig them back up to put them through a cremation. Wow.
So my family member has been buried for 3 years, and we've now got the right number, and it comes around every 4 years that we do this. So I'll go and dig him up now, wrapped in muslin, take him over, put him in a new cloth if he needs to be in a new cloth. And for each person to transition, they'll have a symbol, a totem. So they build totems out of and they're elaborate and all done. It's very personal and intimate to build this for your family member. So this is a pig, or this is an oxen, or this is a whatever. So each person is born with a totem, and that's what goes on their cremation pyre. And then there's 40 of them in this big fire, and they light the lot, and they have the ceremony, which of course involves lots of drinking and celebration and passing, releasing the spirit from this, because they've been in a holding pattern while they're just buried, to being released to their next life. Some of it was quite graphic, and some of the girls were like, we don't want to know any more about that. But it wasn't in a gratuitous way. It was just about him completely sharing, this is how, that's just right there where we bury them. So there's new red, they're not a poppy, but it's a decorative tropical flower, which marks each of the sites. And you can see there's only a few over there because we've just recently had the cremation.
The ceremony,
yeah.
It's interesting that, and there's probably something for us to take from that. We have talked about, how does ceremony fit in with the idea of group identity, and that's a very, powerful experience or articulation of something. So I started off having the chat with Colby, and we were talking, what do humans want from their housing? And we've seen, this whole discussion around humans today. We've weaved around there, but his specific experience is around being a student, right? So it was a lot of, for me, I had a lot of intrigue in regards to, how are uni students living in the greater community? And there seems to be this big polarizing movement of, someone like Colby, who happens to be lucky enough to be in the town that he's going to uni, so he can stay with his parents, and that makes a lot of sense. We love having our kids around, and he also gets the benefit of, obviously, reduction of costs and all that sort of stuff. But then you have the other group of people who their parents maybe are wealthy enough to either pay for an apartment for them or to buy them one. And then you have the third group of people who ultimately the first instinct is to, well, we'll go onto campus, so we'll go onto the actual university and see whether that works as an outcome. And then quickly they find, by the sounds of it, from the majority of people, that you're all forced together. There's not a lot of common bond. There's not a lot of community. A lot of people retreat to their room and then rush outside to use the kitchen and then rush back in. And then after a period of time, what seems to happen is like-minded groups start to come together. So you go to university and you start having a chat, and then you say, hey, you sound like one of my peeps. And then you extend the conversation, and then you say, look, I'm in this barrack or that barrack or wherever campus you're on. Why don't we bandy together and go and get a place of ourselves together? Now, I thought that sounded like madness to me. From everything we know about what happens when groups organically feed together, I thought, surely that's got to be, like, there's got to be a world of pain there as far as everyone living together and that sort of stuff. And so I started to probe Colby in regards to, well, how does that work? You know, like, how do people get on? And interestingly enough, in the chat, I don't know whether you'll be able to see the chat in the actual podcast, but in the chat, one of Colby's, and obviously they knew he was on the podcast, so they're probably, joining in to take the mickey out of him. But one thing that they said was, I said, well, how do you get around the fact that what happens if someone leaves the pan on the kitchen or whatever? And they wrote care in the comments. Yeah. And I was like, what care, And I was like, what are they talking about? And then they went on to go, well, we care for the other people in the house and we care for the group. And I thought, holy shit, like, that's, to me, like, a 20-year-old me was like giving a care for everyone else, probably not as much as I should have, but it says that when your group is formed for a reason, and like you said before, Christine, with a purpose, then you build this care for each other, and with that care becomes a level of support and empathy.
Isn't that interesting? Because, of course, Gen Z has a completely different reputation than that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, from an employer or from my demographic as a 50-year-old bloke, it's 50-something. There's all this fear and trepidation about, they can't be corralled, they can't be taught, whatever. But in actual fact, that's a pretty enormous amount of teamwork right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And prejudice from us oldies is that the way they're doing it can't work, but it does somehow.
Yeah.
And yet the rest of us are saying, oh, well, the ideal job for a Gen Z is to hide in a closet and code all day. They don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to be in it. They don't want to care for anyone. Bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit. A lot of those people young people have an enormous capacity for the emotional alignment that, for me, as a total baby boomer, 1949, I mean, I am a boomer if there ever was a boomer, and was a hippie, of course, American hippie as a boomer.
Yes.
We just, so we had a lot of those ideas, but we couldn't put them into practice. And apparently Gen Z can do better.
Shared reason to do it. And I think that's a little bit coming back to what I found on Thursday is, as you alluded to, we were a group of 7 people. As you said, 4 of us knew each other with, to some extent, filters in the way. Like, a few of us had never really caught up face to face.
Yeah.
But we had an intention to be there for a reason, and also a level of care, because I think that was built by starting off with an understanding of our shared challenges of life. You talked about everyone's health issues. I think that was a great way for us to galvanize as a group.
Well, it certainly was not one of those meetings where everybody tried to one-up everybody else. There wasn't any one-upmanship. There wasn't any, I'm going to be more intellectually brilliant, or I'm going to be better behaved, or I'm going to look good. None of that. And what I'm hearing, what you're saying about your Gen Z son and his friends, is that they also weren't trying to impress each other. They were trying to emotionally align and care for each other. Now, how beautiful is that?
How do we deal with the exceptions when it don't work, and when pure care for each other isn't enough? What are the things that we can fill in between that, so we can help to move that to the next level? And that, that's the exciting part, is if we can tap into the good starts and then extend that into using tools that can help enhance that, what could that look like?
For me, the key part is that starting seed, and we use words like purpose, but they could be that you're a group of engineering students, or you could have some common goal. It doesn't need to be a particularly lofty purpose.
No.
But if you have a starting point that gets you to that the starting blocks of the journey, and you have the ability to do some of that work, I think that is all we need. And we keep referring back to sufficient. Thankfully, talent is not high on our list of priorities because I'm still here. I have sufficient sufficient to get the job done. Don't need to be perfect, but willing to put my hand up when I do make a mistake. And we are, we're here to make the learnings. And some of those learnings I've had to repeat a few times, but
a few. Yeah.
But we've all gone on, part of that is we've all gone on that journey together. And I think by going through this process, we built a really strong group. And that was, and probably, and maybe this is part of it as well, Christine. I wonder whether, because we had so much trust for the people who already had built relationships in that group, that anyone else coming in there probably, or, we're to some extent, humans are very good at, picking up the vibe. That's probably a very hippie thing to say, but in the room, it was probably a high level of comfort. And I think you do a lot of that, and you probably don't even realize it, Christine. So I have noticed that you're very good at cutting through difficult conversations, because, we're all aware that from a health point of view, some people in that group are under more stress than others. But you were able to normalize that in conversation by expressing your own experience, but also a high level of honesty. Like we didn't beat around the bush when people weren't. Jane, if you need to lay down, lay down. Like if you need to stand up, stand up. If you need to do whatever, that's 100% fine. If you need a drink, get a drink. And I think
if you need to fall asleep. No problem. Join the group again later. Yeah.
Well, I think that's been a really great catch up, and it's really fantastic to have all three of us back in the same conversation. And it's been, for me, me finishing off to have my closeout. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation tonight and got a hell of a lot of inspiration out of it, and I suppose motivation to continue on this journey. What about yourself, Christine?
Well, one of the continuing thoughts I've had during this conversation is how important it is for us to learn from Gen Z. Because it isn't as though we have the wisdom and we pass it on to them. We've learned certain things in our lives, but they've already started at a different point. I mean, being born in 1949 is a lot different to being born in the 21st century.
Yes.
And I think that what we really don't want to do is go off the rails trying to be Hindus and Balinese, or go off the rails trying to be something. But how do we incorporate, not look at it as, well, I have the wisdom and I pass it on to you because I'm old. It's not like that. I'm old enough that I want to learn from the Colbys of this world, not just try to teach. So that would be my final. And I'm really glad that I've been having that thought over and over as we've been talking. It's been a lovely conversation. You, Rowan?
Thank you, and blessed to be back. I must say, happy to be back on this Australian community, which has so many positives in it. Some of the stuff in Bali and abject poverty is really a bit unsettling for me, but also aware that need to go and be unsettled, right? So not just in a gym where I'm comfortable and I think, okay, that's a bit heavy and I'll give it a go. I need to be uncomfortable and unsettled in other ways to continue to develop.
Awesome.
So there'll be some lumps along the way, but I really enjoy your mentorship, insight, companionship, because I know I'm a much better person for it.